Welcome back to Real Family Secrets. Grab your snacks, get comfortable. The people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. My name is Ryan Coswell, and my parents died suddenly 8 months ago in a house fire that started, ironically, nowhere near the one room in our home I'd been forbidden to enter my entire life. When I finally decided to sell the house, I opened that garage door for the first time in 31 years. What I found inside nearly made me scream. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside Sacramento, in a modest 3-bedroom house with a detached garage that stood slightly separate from the rest of the property. For as long as I can remember, that garage was locked, and my parents made it clear, without ever fully explaining why, that it was not a place for me or my sister to go. "It's just old tools and your grandfather's things," my mother would say whenever I asked. "Nothing interesting. Nothing a kid needs to be in." My parents died in an electrical fire that started in the kitchen, late on a Tuesday night in November. I got the call at 2 in the morning. By the time I arrived, the house was mostly gone, though the garage, standing separate, had survived almost entirely untouched. The months after that are mostly a blur of paperwork, insurance calls, and grief I still don't fully know how to describe. My sister, Kayla, lives in Oregon and couldn't handle much of the estate work directly, so most of it fell to me. I avoided the garage for months. I told myself it was just logistics, that the house itself needed handling first. But the truth was simpler than that. 31 years of being told not to go in there had built something in me that felt less like curiosity and more like fear. Eventually, though, the realtor needed the property cleared for sale, garage included. I stood in front of that door on a Saturday morning with a key I'd found in my father's desk, and I made myself turn it. The door creaked open, and dust-filtered light fell across a room that looked nothing like what my mother had always described. No old tools, no grandfather's belongings gathering cobwebs. Instead, I found a small, windowless room within the garage, a second door, reinforced, almost like a panic room, and behind it, filing cabinets, a hidden safe, and a wall covered in photographs, news clippings, and documents that made no sense to me at all. The photographs showed my parents, decades younger than I'd ever seen them, standing in front of buildings I didn't recognize, in cities I couldn't place. Some of the news clippings referenced a name I'd never heard before, Marcus and Elena Winthrop, accompanied by grainy photos that, unmistakably, were of my parents. I opened the safe, using a combination I found taped inside a hollowed-out book on a nearby shelf. Inside were 2 passports, old, expired, under the names Marcus and Elena Winthrop, alongside a thick folder labeled simply U.S. Marshals Service, Witness Security Program. My parents had been in witness protection. My entire life, the quiet, unremarkable suburban couple who ran a small hardware store and never missed a single school play had been living under assumed identities, hiding from something in a past I knew nothing about. The folder contained fragments of a story I spent the next several weeks piecing together. My father, Marcus Winthrop, apparently his real name, had testified against an organized crime network in Philadelphia in the early 1990s, before I was born, in exchange for relocation and new identities for himself and my mother. The case had resulted in convictions against several high-ranking figures, men who, according to the documents, had sworn retaliation against anyone connected to the testimony, including family. I sat on the concrete floor of that hidden room for almost an hour, holding documents that rewrote the entire foundation of who I thought my parents were. Every quiet rule of my childhood suddenly made sense in a completely different light. The garage no one could enter, my parents' strange insistence on privacy, the way they never talked about extended family or hometowns. 3 days after I found the room, someone called the house. The number was still technically active, forwarded to my cell during the estate process. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled, unfamiliar. "I know your parents' real names," the voice said. "I know what your father did in 1991. I'd like to talk about what happens to that information now that he's not around to protect it anymore." I nearly dropped the phone. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been waiting a long time for a conversation your father avoided for 30 years, the voice said. "I think you and I should meet, somewhere quiet. Bring the folder your parents kept." I hung up immediately, my hands shaking, and called the only number in that folder that seemed like it might still be active, a contact for a retired U.S. Marshal named Coleman Vance, listed as the original handler on my father's case. To my enormous relief, the number worked. Coleman Vance, now in his 70s, still remembered my father's case in detail. "The men your father testified against were mostly convicted and served long sentences," Vance told me over the phone. "Most are dead or still incarcerated. But organizations like that don't fully disappear. Someone connected to the old network may have pieced together your father's location after all these years, especially once the news of the fire and the estate became public record. What do I do? You call the Marshal's service immediately, and you don't take that call again. Let me handle the notification. This needs to move through proper channels quickly." The following days moved fast in ways that felt entirely surreal. Marshals arrived to review the documents, confirm the threat's credibility, and assess whether any protective measures were needed for me and my sister. Kayla, when I finally told her everything, went quiet on the phone for almost a full minute before saying, "This explains so much about why Mum cried every single year around the same week in October." It took 3 weeks for the Marshals to identify the caller, a lower-tier associate of the original organization, now elderly himself, attempting one final, desperate extortion attempt before what remained of that old network faded entirely into irrelevance. He was arrested before any real danger materialized, a small, almost pathetic epilogue to a threat that had once been genuinely serious. I sold the house eventually, garage included, though not before removing every document, every photograph, every fragment of the life my parents had hidden from me for 31 years. I understand now why that door was always locked. Not out of secrecy for its own sake, but out of a fierce, quiet kind of protection. An entire life built around making sure 2 ordinary kids in Sacramento never had to know how extraordinary and dangerous their parents' real story actually was. Kayla and I visited Coleman Vance in person a few months later, an old man who'd once been responsible for keeping our family alive without either of us ever knowing his name. "Your father was one of the bravest men I worked with in 30 years at the Marshalls," he told us. "He never once complained about the life he had to build from scratch. He just wanted you two to grow up safe and normal and completely unaware of how much that safety actually cost him." I kept one thing from that hidden room, a single photograph of my parents, young, using names I never knew, standing in front of a courthouse in Philadelphia, looking simultaneously terrified and resolute. It sits on my desk now, a reminder that the people who raised me were far braver and far more complicated than the quiet hardware store owners I thought I knew my entire childhood. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real family stories and tell us in the comments, do you think your own parents could be hiding something you'd never expect?
Saw you stepping in, all eyes turning, heartbeat skips to your rhythm, yeah. Daylight sliding through the window, your laughter sets the speakers off. Coffee cooling on the table. We're tangled in playlists and plans. Your energy contagious, pushes worries out the door. This moment light and ordinary turns magic when you say my name. Can't fake this feeling. Your spark pulls me up. Wanna run with you, never slow down. Every move is a message, every glance says now. Oh, let's catch the ride while the city's wide awake. Jump into rhythms only we can make. Turn up the track, reminders fade. We're living loud, don't need to escape. We're living loud, don't need to escape. Oh, texts and quick calls. You're the reason I show up. Weekend plans, sneakers hit the pavement. We run fast, loving the rush. Even ranges motivation, splashes drumming on the ground. In every crowd, you're my invitation. Every laugh another round. Walls disappear, the beats underneath our skin. With you, every day's a headline. We write the rules, we play my favorite win. Let's get you around while the city's wide awake.